morning. My name is Becky Dogg, and I serve as chair of the Undoing Racism Committee, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this morning. Actually, the work of the American Civil Liberties Union is well known and well respected around our country. So it's a great pleasure to have representatives today in the person of Ed Borocas, who is the legal director of ACLU of New Jersey. I was thinking about ACLU and realizing that years and years ago, their work seemed so far removed, so esoteric, very intellectual discussions about constitutional rights and so on. But in this past generation, ACLU has been really in the forefront, in the thick of the most pressing issues of our day. And certainly that has been true of our chapter here in New Jersey. So it's with a great deal of pleasure that I ask the legal director of American Civil Liberties Union, Ed Borocas, to talk to us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here, and thanks for letting me share in this service with you. It's just really beautiful. And you know, I said during the earlier service how I was really moved by the choir, and I could hear, based on where I was located, right in front of them, not only the general overall voice of the choir, but each individual voice I could hear, which each were beautiful. And I mention it because it makes me think of two things. One is how it's very easy that we as a society can think of ourselves each separate from one another and make rules and regulations against other people, forgetting that we all together create harmony or disharmony. And the second thing is that it makes you realize that each voice is also important in being part of a choir. And right now, that can be a choir for change, because as I'll explain, we're at a unique point in time to change from a mass incarceration culture. So this is a heavy subject, and I'm going to open on a very disturbing note, but I will hopefully end on a hopeful note. It's disturbing because America's over-incarceration of its citizen is a tremendous dark mark on us as a society. But there's some hope, because sentiment is beginning to change, and now is the time, as I'll explain, that we can actually affect change. We have the disgraceful distinction of being the world's largest jail. More than Russia, more than China, more than anyone else with larger populations or tyrants. We have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prisoners. Since 1970, our prison population has increased by 700%. It's an increase that, of course, far outpaces population growth and crime. We now have approximately 2.3 million individuals in prison, up from fewer than 350,000 in 1972. More than half of them are in more non-violent crimes. And in New Jersey, it is no better. In 2010, approximately 23,000 inmates in our state system, an increase of 6,000 30 years ago. And this doesn't account for the 15,000 inmates on any given day that are in our county jails. There's a real cost in lives and a real cost in families destroyed. Not only is time spent behind bars taking one's liberty away, but people face the loss of apartments, loss of their jobs. Students lose student loans. Persons in public housing lose their public housing. Immigrants are at risk of deportation. And every person in prison or on probation or parole in New Jersey loses their right to vote. It's also a cost in actual dollars spent And every dollar that's spent on mass incarceration is a dollar not spent on education, not spent on fixing inequality, not spent on health care. It is a bar to the possibility for a fair and a just America. And it is a harsh penalty that is disproportionately placed on the poor and on communities of color. So what's created the mass incarceration culture? There are a number of things. One is harsher sentencing laws. No politician ever loses votes by getting tough on crime. But with mandatory minimum sentences and harsher top-end sentences, our laws have lost a lot of their proportionality and their reasonableness. And, as was mentioned, people are remaining in prison a lot longer, and people are remaining in jails. And at the end of this talk, I will mention more thoroughly our bail system, which actually incarcerates people not based on their risk, but based on their resources. Two other reasons I'll focus on: the war on drugs and what's called broken windows policing. The war on drugs has been raging for 4 years and has been a massive failure. The focus of the war has changed significantly over the years. First half was focused largely on stopping heroin and crack cocaine. But with the ebb of the crack epidemic in the late 1980s, law enforcement changed to a new and easy target: marijuana. As a result, over the past 20 years, police departments across the country have directed resources towards enforcement of marijuana laws. So even as all overall drug arrests have declined since 2006, marijuana arrests continue to be on the rise. They now make up over half of all drug arrests in the United States. And the war on drugs has become a war on marijuana, a war on, actually, marijuana users, just like the war on drugs has always been a war not on drugs, but on drug users. The numbers across the nation and in New Jersey are staggering, and once again, communities of color are disproportionately targeted. Nationally, in 2010, there were almost 900,000 marijuana arrests. To put it in perspective, that's 300,000 more arrests than for all violent crimes. In New Jersey, in 2010, over 21,000 arrests for marijuana possession, almost double the arrests for any other single offense. And enforcing marijuana possession laws in 2010 cost New Jersey $127 million. And there are discriminatory laws and discriminatory enforcement targeting communities of color. And this happens not just in Ferguson, Missouri, but as we know, right here in our own communities, and very much I will talk about right down the road in Newark, New Jersey. Studies show that blacks and whites use marijuana at the same rate. Yet, black people were 2.8 times more likely to be arrested in New Jersey for marijuana possession. Nationally, blacks are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested than whites, again, despite the same percentage of usage. Now, one reason for the disparity is because of laws, like school zone laws, that affect people living in cities a lot more than they affect people living in suburbia. Another reason is because of the style of policing in many cities that's become more prevalent, which is called broken windows policing. And over the past 20 years, broken windows policing has resulted in law enforcement pouring resources to targeted communities to enforce a wide array of low-level offenses through aggressive stop-and-frisk practices. They've shifted their focus from traditional policing strategies of responding to calls for service to policing concentrating on, as as I said, low-level quality of life offenses, predominantly in communities of color. Proponents would say that this prevents higher-level crimes by getting people when they commit low-level crimes. But obviously, it ensnares many people whose only offenses are low-level crimes. And as a result, people are dragged hundreds of thousands of individuals into the criminal justice system for non-violent minor offenses, often marijuana possession. In addition, for all people, whether they commit a crime or not, simply living in that community creates a system that pits the police against the communities that they serve. We see it all around the country. We see it in Ferguson. We see it here in Newark. We see it continuing, not just with the broken windows policing, but with our militarization of the police force, saying that the police are not to serve the community, but to be in charge of the community. And the best example of the stop and frisk practices that are run amok are right in our background in New York City and right here in Newark. Now, the idea of to stop and frisk is to stop people to see if they have weapons or drugs, to get their names if they have outstanding warrants. But the way it's been conducted has been so aggressive and, frankly, unconstitutional. Under the law, you can't stop and frisk someone unless you have a reasonable belief that they have evidence of a crime. But that's not the way the Newark Police Department was doing it. So let me talk about Newark for a moment. For 50 years, people have been calling for the Department of Justice to monitor the Newark Police Department. And the ACLU received complaint after complaint. This is not to say that all police are bad people, but yet we received such a significant amount of complaints that something has to be done. The system was not correcting itself. So in 2010, we hired someone at the ACLU of New Jersey to put together a petition to send to the Department of Justice, explaining why their oversight is needed. We documented over 400 alleged instances of police misconduct in Newark, essentially over just a 3.5-year period. And that was just what we were able to find. Less than a year later, the Department of Justice agreed to open an investigation. And just a few months ago, in July of 2014, the Department of Justice has now issued its findings. And they were worse than the ACLU even imagined. Talked about theft of people's property as they were being booked. He talked about retaliation by police for individuals who were just asserting their rights. He talked about a completely broken internal affairs system where it was so skewed in favor of the officers that when it came to citizens' abuse complaints, there was only one that was sustained over that entire time, so that people would simply not want to go. But what I saw as the worst finding was regarding stop and frisk. That the Department of Justice found that 3 out of every 4 stops in Newark, 75% of the stops could not be substantiated by reasonable suspicion. In other words, 3 out of every 4 stops in Newark were unconstitutional stops. Unconstitutional. But their finding has now created an opportunity for voices to be heard, because now is the time period between now and at least the end of the year where the Department of Justice and Newark need to come together to issue a consent decree. So I'll explain in a moment what can be done about that, how real change can be effectuated. But first, there's one more issue of concern, because in addition to treating our adults as in this way with the idea of mass incarceration, we're also bringing that to how we treat children. More and more, we're treating matters that were handled within a school as everything needing to be a police matter. Now, some matters probably are police matters. There was some heinous allegations that have come out in a town in New Jersey, where the issue is not whether it's criminal or not. If true, it's very criminal. But should we waive these juveniles up to be tried as adults? The ACLU in New Jersey takes the position that juveniles should never be tried as adults. Under the juvenile system, kids could go to jail for years. There is punishment in the system. But there's a recognition in having a juvenile justice system that, in fact, kids are different. Their minds are different. Their minds are still developing. For that reason, we treat them differently, with a more rehabilitative concept in mind. But our juvenile justice system that's been meant to be rehabilitative is becoming more retributive. Additionally, once juveniles enter the system, it's becoming harder to reintegrate them back into schools, and school districts often place barriers to such reentry. So what can be done? The opportunity is now, as I've seen as never before, to change this mass incarceration culture. In response to the Department of Justice report, the Department of Justice and Newark will soon enter into a consent decree. So it's an opportunity to change the broken policing system, the broken window policing system. There will be new training that's required to change the stop and frisk policy. There will be a collaborative system, we hope, between the community and the police, including a civilian complaint review board. But we need the voices to make sure that the best practices possible are adopted. The ACLU of New Jersey has helped create newer communities for accountable policing, NCAP, to advocate to make sure that these best practices and the most community relation policies are included in the consent decree. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to the ACLU of New Jersey website to find out more. In addition, reform of marijuana laws. We have seen Colorado, we've seen Washington now change to a tax and regulated system instead of treating marijuana as a crime. I mean, this is actually an interesting issue. Both sides, it runs across political lines. Cory Booker and Rand Paul have gotten together and discussed the need to change the war on drugs. By the way, this is Cory Booker, as it was pointed out to me, I was reminded of during the coffee hour, that this is the same Cory Booker that did hire this police director that brought broken windows policing in full force in Newark. But Cory Booker is saying the right things now about the issue of changing our drug system, which we have to do. So it's an effort to tax and regulate marijuana to seek to create a safe and controlled system of access and distribution, which would have huge social and economic benefits, where otherwise law-abiding citizens are not turned into criminals, where racial disparities in arrests will decrease, and law enforcement will be free to focus on serious crime and real public safety issues. It will not correct all of the broken criminal justice system problems, but it's an important step in the right direction. We're also at an incredibly historic moment of bail reform. Our criminal justice system has had a tremendous bias in favor of the rich against the poor. Probably always will. But one of the worst factors is our bail system. With a focus being on money bail, people languish, and they do thousands in New Jersey today, languish in jail, not because they're a danger, not because they are fleeing, but because they can't afford even small amounts of bail, a few $1,000s. Whether one ends up in jail at this point is for months or even years awaiting trial, is not based on risk, but based on resources. But that is something that can now be changed and is in the process of being changed. And it's needed because, think about it, people plead guilty simply because they're poor. Think about being arrested and being in jail for 5, 6 months, awaiting a trial, and being told, if you plead guilty, we'll give you probation. Because these are low-level offenses. They would get probation. We will give you probation, you can go out today if you plead guilty. So whether someone's guilty or not, they're not going to have the opportunity to present their case because it is so skewed against them. But thankfully, everyone recognized, from the ACLU to the Attorney General, to the public defenders, to prosecutors, to Governor Chris Christie, they knew this was an unfair system and it had to be changed. In fact, Christie's line during his press conference about signing the bail reform bill was, "Miracles do happen. The ACLU of New Jersey actually agrees with me." And it's true. And frankly, we agree. We would say he agrees with us. But kudos have to go where kudos are deserved. And Governor Christie actually used an important term. He said it's time to get rid of debtors' prisons, which is, frankly, a bold term to use for any government. So the new system would be that for most offenders, the presumption is simply to be released. And then if the judge determines that more is necessary because of safety to the public or risk of flight, non-monetary restrictions, such as ankle bracelets would be the best example, should be imposed. The concept is that no one should be awaiting trial in jail simply because of an inability to pay. So, for this to get done, however, on the high end, the piece of the puzzle that had to be added is the ability of judges, when they determine that no options for usually high-level offenses, when no options will protect the safety of the public or against flight risk, to hold some offenders without bail. Right now, our Jersey Constitution doesn't allow that. So this question is going to be on the ballot in November. And it would, under limited circumstances, allow judges to hold people when there are no other options at work, and for particular identified offenses, hold people in jail without bail. So it's a question that, standing alone, we might disagree with, but it's one that a lot of people, including the ACLU, support, because this is what is necessary in order for all the positive aspects of the bail bill to take effect, for the entire system to change from a resource-based system to a risk-based system. So we're now at this crossroads in so many ways, in the idea that Ferguson and Staten Island and here in Newark and New York City, that things are being brought to light, militarization of police, that people are up in arms about, that people are actually getting up in arms about, that people on both sides of the aisle are saying that the drug war is wrong and it's time to end it. This is the time. It's a time, because pendulums do swing, and this is the time to speak out, to make each voice be part of the choir, so that our criminal laws and our penal systems can change, that our sentencing systems can change, that they can be more compassionate, more just, more equitable, that we can each be a voice in the choir for fairness and justice. And now is the time.